LoreWarrior Campaign, 4th Succession War, Glenmora. The 5 companies, including the elite Black Widows of Jamie Wolfe's Alpha Regiment, chose the continent of Hades as their own. Hades, the centre of volcanic activity on Glenmora, is dominated by 5 active volcanoes, each with a maze of lava flows. The continent has most of Glenmora's small chemical industry, with 3 major factories and attendant cities on the north and south coasts. With Colonel Wolfe attending the wedding on Terra, much of the initial deployment of Alpha Regiment fell to Major Kelly Yukhanov. Major Yukhanov, knowing what Colonel Wolfe would do, arranged the Dragoons along Hades' only river, the Leith, to give each company the advantage of a unique terrain feature. The 5th Galedon Regulars, one of the units that had chased the Dragoons' families out of the Combine, dropped on Glenmora on the 18th of September. The 5th had been the personal regiment of Warlord Samsonov, and one of their own had discovered his body. The shame of losing their liege was such that 3 officers, including the regiment's executive officer, committed seppuku. The remaining officers and warriors swore blood vows against the Dragoons. Brigadier General Li Dokto, who'd assumed command, agreed with his enraged warriors that the Dragoons had to be punished. After making their drop 100 kilometres east of the Dragoons, the 5th spent much of their first week getting accustomed to the unusual terrain. As the 5th approached, the Dragoons began harassing them with frequent fighter strikes designed to slow the advance and make the mechs waste their ammunition. Major Yukhanov also ordered surveillance craft, usually small airplanes flown by civilian volunteers, to gain as much information as they could on the approaching enemy. They came back with little news other than the Combine Regiment was almost at full strength. The first contact between the 5th Galedon and the Dragoons occurred at a gully east of the Dukan lava flow. In a lapse of common sense, Major Yukhanov decided to scout the enemy personally. As his light lance rounded a bend, he found an assault lance of Combine warriors. The fight, though short, was costly for both. 2 Combine mechs were seriously damaged when the lead warrior stepped his warhammer into his lancemate's line of fire and caught a salvo of lasers in the back. The Dragoons made the best of the Combine's over-eagerness by concentrating their fire on the second mech and getting a lucky hit that froze its right leg. The other 2 Combine mechs let loose a heavy salvo of missile and laser fire, reducing the front of Yukhanov's mech to slack. The Major was knocked unconscious, and his computer took control and activated the ejection seat when it sensed that the coolant systems on the mech were failing. As the unconscious Major then arced away from the fight, the other Dragoons tried to go after their fallen leader but couldn't break free of the enemy. Seeing they couldn't rescue him, they drew the Combine forces away, hoping that air rescue would be able to find him before the Combine did. Glenmora Air Rescue had saved Major Yukhanov, but it was a very close call. With the Dragoons' fighters providing cover, 3 helicopters flown by civilians left Tronka, the major city of Hades, at the mouth of the Leith. They had little trouble homing in on the Major's chair beacon. When the Combine intercepted the frantic communications about rescuing one downed warrior, they realised the missing pilot's importance and tried to get there first. The opposing fighters met first, with the Dragoon pilots besting the less experienced Combine ones. A lance of light Combine mechs then arrived at the rescue scene just as the first helicopter was about to land, the mechs quickly destroying 2 of the helicopters. The Dragoon fighters, hearing what was happening, broke from their battle with the Combine fighters and dove to the ground, strafing the Combine mechs and sending them scurrying long enough for the remaining chopper to land. Just as it was about to lift off, a Combine Locust charged. The terrified helicopter crew later reported seeing the Locust suddenly jerk up, just in time to get a face full of exhaust as a large, black Dragoon Phoenix Hawk Lamb crashed into it feet first. As the dust cleared, the helicopter crew saw the black mech end the struggle with a fierce slam of its fist into the cockpit of the Locust. The Dragoon mech turned and gave a thumbs-up signal to the shocked crew, and as the helicopter sped away, the crew saw the Lamb struggling to its feet to meet a lance of Combine mechs, alone. With severe wounds on his arm and leg, Major Yukhanov was obviously out of the fight for months. Major Yukhanov passed command of Alpha Regiment to Major Koshasha Dukirk, a foreigner to the Dragoons who had been hired by Jamie Wolfe 4 years earlier from a hiring hall on the Combine world of Diran. Though she wasn't Combine-born, the fact that she had spent most of her life there with the defunct Fire Lizard Mercenary Regiment made many Dragoon soldiers suspicious of her, and when she was placed in command, many were just openly defiant. Major Dukirk turned to her detractors, unsheathed a razor-sharp dagger, and placed it to her throat. The stunned Dragoon officers stood stock still as she said, "I am a Dragoon whose loyalty has been questioned. To prove my worth, I demand that if any of you truly believe me disloyal, say so now, and I will calmly slit my own throat and spill my blood." No one came forward. "Good. Now to business," she said as the sheathed dagger was returned. Her first action then as commander was to turn loose the Black Widows. With a smart salute and a smile that would frighten any warrior, Captain Natasha Kerensky left the Alpha HQ to assemble her company and begin worm hunting. Major Dukirk let the other company's orders stand, but warned them to expect some very tough decisions. The Black Widows didn't wait long to prove their worth. 5 days into the wilderness, Captain Kerensky and her company skirted the Combine's main force and tested the enemy's flank. On the 5th of September, they discovered a mobile HQ and a column of transports protected by only a lance of medium mechs. With a whoop, Captain Kerensky ordered the attack, and soon the Black Widows were slicing through the column. By the time they were finished, the Widows had destroyed the mobile HQ, most of the transports, and 3 of the 4 escort mechs, while sustaining only light damage. The Widows didn't realise what they'd done. They just destroyed a rare Star League-era mobile HQ that had equipment capable of providing comprehensive data and plans that would have made it far easier for General Dokto to attack the Dragoons. Its loss actually caused the 5th Galedon to become more cautious and less unified for the remainder of the campaign. The Widows went on to create even more havoc. Their harassment of supply movement and picking off isolated Combine mechs caused Kuritan delays totaling more than a week. General Dokto finally had to dispatch 2 companies of his 3rd Battalion to his rear area to take on the Black Widows. The 2 companies, both with heavy and assault mechs, finally caught up with the Widows at the Mud Pits, named for its huge pits of gargling mud. The area was a maze of rocky columns and mists of superheated steam. The rest of the Widows, out of sight, the Combine mechs confidently advancing on Captain Kerensky and her command lance. When the Combine mechs did open fire, Kerensky and her lance retreated, and the Combine mechs followed as quickly as they could, this cat-and-mouse game continuing for 15 minutes, with Kerensky seeming to pause and wait for the Combine mechs to catch up on several occasions. Suddenly, huge geysers of steam appeared, and with Captain Kerensky's Warhammer heading straight for them, and the Combine mechs in pursuit, the geysers, hundreds of meters high in the bowl of what had been a volcano, spewed steam and water so hot and laden with metallic salts that the sensors of the Combine mechs couldn't see through them. At the far end of the bowl were Captain Kerensky and her lance, turning now to face the Combine mechs. Fearing a trap, but seeing nothing, the Combine mechs moved past the geysers and opened fire, and just as they did, the geysers ceased, revealing the hot and wet, but ready, fire and strike lances of the Widows. They'd been hiding inside the spray of water. The fight was short, but vicious, with the Black Widows withdrawing before the Combine numbers could take their toll. The Widows destroyed 4 Galedon Regulars and damaged many others. During this early fighting, Colonel Wolfe was on his way to Glenmora. After the wedding, in which the universe had been turned on its ear, especially for Chancellor Lau, Jamie Wolfe boarded his private vessels and began the long journey to Glenmora. During his travels, he saw many of Prince Davian's preparations for Operation Rat. Impressive as this offensive was, his main concern was to reach his regiment. While his jump ship was recharging in the Bennett star system for the jump into Glenmora, Colonel Wolfe met with Marshal Carl Sanders concerning the status of his 10th Deneb Light Cavalry RCT. The mechs and many of the other regiments of the RCT had already moved from Roe, their previous posting, to Bennett 3. There, they were equipped for rapid movement should the Dragoons call on them. Jump ships stood charged and ready to receive the dropships waiting on Bennett 3. Along with this information came some very bad news. MEO operatives within the Combine had detected the passage of the 16th Galedon Regular Mech Regiment through Misery on its way toward the Federated Suns, and it was with a sense of dread that Colonel Wolfe ordered the captain of his jump ship to recalculate his journey to Glenmora to use a pirate point close to the planet. Colonel Wolfe's instincts proved correct again. If he hadn't ordered the change of entry points, he would have appeared at the zenith point, surrounded by the jump ships and dropships of the 16th Galedon Regulars. Colonel Wolfe's entry point placed him 2 days away from Glenmora at the highest acceleration his dropships would allow, the same travel time as the dropships carrying the Galedon Regulars. But luckily, avoiding detection by the enemy ships for those 2 days, Colonel Wolfe's dropship tested that luck further again by attempting to land on Hades in the midst of the enemy's drop. Using an opposite orbit, the Colonel's ship began its drop shielded from the Combine forces by the planet, but as it descended it gradually grew closer. Combine fighters didn't notice the Dragoon dropships until it had positioned itself in the midst of the Combine mechs plummeting down toward the surface. Amazed and outraged, the pilots attempted to follow and attack Colonel Wolf's dropship, but couldn't because of the high speed, the heat of atmospheric entry, and the threat of colliding with their own mechs. Some Combine fighters braved the dangers and, with unmatched determination, made repeated attempts to shoot down and even ram the Colonel's ship. One, a Shylone, did ram it, and even though the collision was a glancing one, it did cause major system failures, shutting down the ship's engines for a terrifying moment. They were restarted with minutes to spare, but the ship landed at frightening speed and with a concussion of metal against concrete as the landing gear collapsed, embedding it into the landing pad. Colonel Wolf assumed command, thanking Majors Yukinov and Dukirk and praising them for their decisions and actions. Assessing his situation, he now saw instantly that the arrival of the 16th Galedon had worsened an already bad situation. With the 5th beaten but still potent to the east and the mechs of the 16th landing to the north, the Dragoons near Tronka were in danger of being surrounded. The more numerous Combine fighters were trying to take control of the air from the Dragoons' aerospace fighters, and the Combine were already making it too dangerous to retreat from the system, though few Dragoons wanted to flee anyway. The Colonel realised that the Combine would try to link its two regiments and push the Dragoons back, eventually pinning them to the sea. If Alpha Regiment had any chance of survival, the Dragoons had to slip between the two regiments before they had a chance to link up. Colonel Wolf laid out his plans to his warriors, warning them that the chances of escape were slim. That night, a flotilla of hovercraft evacuated technicians and the wounded to a safer shore, while Alpha Regiment prepared. The Dragoons abandoned their defensive positions at sunset and marched to the northeast. In an effort to avoid detection, the Dragoons turned off many of their mech systems and ran their reactors just hot enough to walk, with the Black Widows on point. The weather, which had been threatening and would have helped cloak the Dragoons, didn't cooperate. As dawn broke on October 2nd, the sun rose in a cloudless sky as the Dragoons moved through the black lava fields just south of Banbury's Cone, one of Hades' active volcanoes. Realising that their chances of escaping without detection were now non-existent, Colonel Wolf ordered the Dragoons to power their weapons. Less than 10 minutes later, a pair of fighters from the 5th Galedon spotted the columns of Dragoons, and after notifying their commanders of the sighting, the fighters attacked. The Dragoons destroyed the two fighters easily and quickly, but realised that their position was no longer secret. Colonel Wolf reorganised his troops into battle formation and sped the pace. Every hill crest and every sudden hollow became a place where each warrior expected to see charging Combine mechs. Professional skills replaced anxiety when a company of light Curitan mechs, reinforced by a detachment of tanks from the 16th Galedon, appeared on Alpha Regiment's left flank. As the Dragoons wheeled to face the approaching enemy, a Dragoon pilot overheard reporting that a similar force was now approaching on the right flank. Colonel Wolf ordered his troops to conserve ammo and keep moving toward the northeast, no matter what. At first, the Battle of Banbury's Cone seemed to go the Dragoons' way. The lighter Combine mechs and tanks couldn't stop the heavier Dragoons, which inflicted serious damage, even though they were using only lasers and PPCs. The Dragoons were slowed down, however, and that was all the Combine needed. After fending off the enemy's hit-and-run attacks for an hour, the Black Widows reported that several companies of heavier mechs were approaching from the north and east. Overhead, Combine fighters had arrived to challenge the fighters of the Dragoons, and as Colonel Wolf manoeuvred his regiment to meet the approaching enemy, a tracking station at Tronka sent him an urgent message that a Combine dropship had left orbit and was entering Glenmora's atmosphere. Though he might still elude the approaching heavier Combine mechs and fighters, he knew he couldn't escape. The dropship's massive firepower if it landed near the fighting. Colonel Wolf also knew a retreat would be futile because the dropship could maneuver into his path and he could do little but continue fighting and hope that the dropship captain made the tactical mistake of landing behind his comrades instead of behind the Dragoons. His luck did hold out, as just after the dropship landed on the Combine side of the battle line and its crew began securing the ship's engines, Colonel Wolf ordered the pullback. Using the plumes of smoke and dust stirred up by the dropship's engines as cover, they retreated into a complex and precisely executed manoeuvre. Companies fell back under cover of fire to a new set of defensive positions from which they provided cover fire for the rest of the regiment to pull back. Within minutes, the Dragoons were beyond the range of the Combine dropship and its engines were now too cold to refire for hours. Alpha Regiment broke contact with the mechs of the 5th and 16th Galedon Regulars and returned to Tronka. The escape had cost it 3 warriors and 4 mechs. All of the survivors had sustained damage, much of it heavy. And even in this grim situation, the Dragoons were far too angry to abandon Glenmora. Dragoon officers debated asking the 10th Deneb for assistance, but decided not to, because the situation was so desperate that by the time the 10th could get there, it might be only easy prey for now battle-hardened Combine troops. After weeks of hard and bitter fighting, the 16th Galedon marched into the suburbs of Tronka in the second week of December. To cross the river, the last major obstacle before the city, 2 companies of medium mechs found a ford far upstream. They then marched back to the Delbert Bridge, which was defended by the Black Widows. The sudden presence of a larger enemy force on his side of the river prompted Colonel Wolfe to order the Dragoons to pull back to positions in the city centre, near the spaceport and communications area. Seeing the Dragoons abandoning these positions emboldened the Combine warriors, who eagerly have followed the Dragoons through the outskirts and into the city. Time and again the Dragoons, waiting at corners or on rooftops, ambushed the Galedon mechs. The militia of Glenmora did yeoman duty, with the 3rd Glenmora Tank Regiment proving to be a valuable auxiliary. Combine forces advanced, pushed through traps, driven by revenge and the glory that would go with capturing or killing Jamie Wolfe. Generals Docteau and Francisco Bevier exhorted their troops forward in a race for the honour of finishing off the Dragoons. There were reports that mechs from the 2 regiments fought with one another for the privilege of destroying a severely damaged Dragoon mech and its pilot. The single-minded Combine troops didn't notice incoming dropships until the final stages of the drop run. The confused regimental commanders had a spell of indecision, but fortunately for the Galedon, unfortunately for the 10th Deneb, the fighter pilots of the Combine responded promptly. The Combine fighters met the dropships just as they were about to release their mechs, and once on the ground, warriors of the Deneb Light Cavalry, many in their first battle, mistakenly failed to protect the remaining dropships. The Combine fighter force sliced through the Deneb dropships, blowing up an aging Union and a Leopard before they could drop their mechs. Because many dropships were forced to eject their loads before final positioning, the mechs of the 10th Deneb hit the ground of Hades damaged and scattered. Marshal Carl Sanders, who had decided to help the Dragoons when he learned the 16th had arrived on Glenmora, attempted to rally before the Combine mechs could react. Getting most of his enforcers, Valkyries and Griffins together, he then marched toward Tronka. The 10th Deneb's immediate objective was to punch through the Combine encirclement and relieve the Dragoons. By that time, the second wave of Deneb forces, which were 2 tank regiments, should be landing to lend support. Fearing that counterintelligence would tip off the Curetans, Marshal Sanders didn't notify the Dragoons of his relief effort and arrived in the system at a pirate point. The Cheetahs, as the 10th Deneb cavalry was known, pushed through the light Combine forces on the outskirts of the city. The heavier mechs in the city centre stopped the inexperienced Davian warriors who couldn't manoeuvre amid the buildings. Marshal Sanders was killed only 2 blocks from where the Dragoons were trying to hold off the attack of 4 assault companies. Marshal Sanders, in his Wolverine, sent his command company ahead to relieve the Dragoons and remained alone to protect a key intersection. A Stinger, leaping from an office block, knocked the Wolverine to the ground, and as Marshal Sanders tried to right his mech, a Stalker fired shot after shot, hit from the shell of a gutted building, and when members of the company returned, they found the Marshal severely wounded in the hulk of his mech, dying soon afterwards. Members of the 10th Deneb's only assault company linked up with the remainder of the Dragoons, but then reduced to just 3 companies. The rest of the 10th Deneb were holding open a path through the city, but its warriors were shaky, and news of their commander's death and the horror of their first battle had battered morale. Colonel Wolfe, with the permission of Colonel Dietrichson, Marshal Sanders' young aide, broadcast over the Cheetah's communications band that he was assuming control. He, with his calm, self-assured voice and his reputation as one of the best military minds in the Hemisphere, was enough to bolster the young warriors of the 10th. Colonel Wolfe then led the Dragoons and the 10th from Tronka. The tank regiments of the 10th Deneb prevented Curetan pursuit, and the commanders of the 5th and 16th Galedon Regulars decided to pause, regroup, and consider strategy. Taking advantage of the lull, Colonel Wolfe ordered his troops and the 10th Deneb to rest for the night. The next morning, the members of the 10th Deneb Light Cavalry awoke to find painted on their mechs and vehicles, beneath the Federated Sunburst crest and the cheetah patch of their RCT, the wolf patch of the Dragoons, put there during the night by the appreciative members of Alpha Regiment. Though the campaign for Glenmora was still unresolved, as this work was going to press, the bravery of Alpha Regiment and the 10th Deneb Light Cavalry were proven.